our perception of a collection of interactions between actors and objects in different places, serialized into a narrative structure, is an illusion. Welcome back to Get Tales. Today, I was going to apologize for my handwriting. See, at my university, they would surprise you with hammers at the graduation ceremony and just break hands. Something to do with giving you a signature handwriting. After that, I was going to redraw these pictures and maybe give you a walk through some of the designs, but I noticed this note I wrote here. Actions do not exist. So no. And for computers, it's better put as events don't exist. So no. And I'd like to dive into that for the rest of this video. Now, those of you who have studied up on object-oriented programming probably know that events came before object-oriented programming. They're older. And this gives rise to my new tagline. Events are not a thing, so stop trying to cast them as things. In their favor, they are familiar to human phenomenology. However, our perception of a collection of interactions between actors and objects in different places, serialized into a narrative structure, is an illusion. It is based in our own individual perception. When instead we look at the human experience from the perspective of a third party, we can see immediately almost how other people's narratives are not necessarily going to be coherent to us. What we might think would be another person's life lessons might not mean anything to them. And the events which have actually shaped their worldview might surprise us. When we're programming, we should be aware of our everyday environment, in which we regularly perceive a subjective consciousness, and yet also believe a larger consciousness exists, in which our actions are recognized in the order and kind in which we ourselves perceive them. This can personal spiritual practice might find this as a deity, but even the agnos and the atheist are suspect to this. We believe that our life has a purpose, perhaps, and that we're moving forward to achieve it. As I see it, special relativity also, as well as spiritual practice, deals with the validity of this narrative in the human domain. But in programming, we should recall events are not a thing. Stop trying to cast them as things. Okay. Alright, okay. Yes. You can name a class quote-unquote event, or some permutation thereon. For the uninitiated, we make up types of objects simply by naming a new file and putting our class in it of the same name. So we're free to create any type of object we need to. But when we name a class, say, address book update event, we're referring to a train of thought being shared amongst a system of independent, interconnected beings, which doesn't have that higher explicit consciousness. And the phrase train of thought, consider it from a neuroscience perspective, right? It's train of thought is just a nominalization, convenient to talk about the collection of firing neurons that are related to the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex that give rise in their pattern of how they're firing to the inner monologue that we perceive. Right? And so underneath, we can see these words are really verbs, made up to look like nouns, like objects. With that distinction in mind, let's look at some words that we use to describe actions versus those we might use for other objects. So our address book update event might be fired off, and you might wait or listen for an address book update event. And if you're into event-driven programming and you're creating an object that's being passed around, that's being mutated, you can update this address book update event. Now, what sort of things would we expect to do to an object, to any other object, right? Like, let's say a user profile. So we can update a user profile. We can also create or instantiate a user profile. And think about how many events you've ever created. We can also abstractly define a user profile, right? We could pass the user profile to another object. You could pass objects, right? To objects. You might pass this user profile to like a user profile validator, return a valid or not valid Boolean. Okay? You could also create a collection of user profiles and pass a reference to this user profile into that collection. Let's say you pass the user profile to that collection. And since one gets points for lack of creativity in naming classes in Java, I'd call that a user profile list. So here's, to any remaining skeptic, here's my challenge, right? Please name a programming language, not a data protocol, programming language, which supplies the term fire or listen as a primitive command. Right? These are older terms. The objects in object-oriented programming are also rooted in human phenomenology. Objects have properties, which can be called fields or variables, and they have methods, which are sometimes called functions in other languages than in Java. The variables are themselves objects of a certain type that we define in the class. And these are either quote-unquote primitive types, or they are defined as a type of class with properties themselves, so on down the line until you get to the primitives. The methods, the other members of a class, of an object, are the things that the object can do. Right, and they're kind of analogous to verbs in this metaphor. I'd like to point out, Java chooses not to use the word function. You'll find it in object-oriented C, I think. You'll find it certainly in JavaScript. You'll find it in a few different languages that can be considered object-oriented. And I think that Java chooses not to use the word function because if you think about it, a function is really a noun. It's a very special type of thing, isn't it? A function. It's certainly can be an algorithm, but it's hard to call a function a verb or an event. Yeah, it's a definition. It's a noun. Well, let's get back to events. As the event progresses through its narrative, let's say, the data associated with it changes. Right? Things get added to its variables, subtracted, things are updated, right? The whole thing's mutating. And at nominal problem sizes and event frequencies, developers who are attempting to handle a series of asynchronous events, read mobile developers, who are using an event-driven idiom, they will rather quickly become unable to accurately predict what state a given bit of data will be in. Signs of illness may include excessive null checks, multiple or nested synchronization blocks, anything but limited use of the word volatile, and your app freezing a lot. What's causing these symptoms? Well, obviously, one's developers are not understanding the reified algorithm. But what allows them to not understand exactly what the computer is doing? The implicit nature of the algorithm. It's not written down. So, if events aren't first-class citizens in object-oriented programming, how can we continue to express our thoughts in narrative form, and do so in a way in which we know a program won't get tied in knots once we try to scale it? The solution, as I see it, is to use some sort of grammar with which we can explicitly describe and work out all aspects of the algorithm like we would a math equation. So, first, we need to define each data transformation atomically, or as close as to atomic as practical. And these transformations can be called message-based event loops. We then, explicitly, formally, in writing, however you like to put it, define the order, and importantly the timing, of the caching, filtering, and any other operations we require. To maintain the narrative quality, the grammar in which we do these two things must be composable, such that we can combine these parts into orders and perhaps have some protection against invalid orders, although we know that we can't have complete protection against nonsense in any grammar. And lastly, we're going to want to have interfaces with the event-driven programming, or even more generally, imperative programming. Getting back to the project at hand, we would find our new grammar useful in either design. User action will affect some object in a graph of objects, and it will be our mistake as developers to have that object create an event designed to be passed around while being mutated. However, it's my intuition, spidey sense that keeping the user interface related to changing values rather than performing actions will help us quickly make the change from user swipe or user update objects to a method called and or stored values. In the next video in the series, because we have certainly gone off of app design at this point and have gone to the philosophy behind message-based event loops, we'll continue on this path and consider how we can compose these, and perhaps take a look at some languages in which we can do this. In the current app, we'll see some use of this, but its problem space is not particularly demanding of this sort of programming. However, You will see it quite a bit in the next project that we'll be doing. And for now, thank you for watching. Please do comment, share, or subscribe. Happy hacking.